We have one more story for you. And it is a story about second chances. John.
When I was 20 years old, my girlfriend was raped in New York City. In my anger and anguish over what happened to her, I went and confronted the man who raped her, and I took his life. I was sentenced to 30 years in prison, of which I had to serve 10 before I would be eligible for parole. I served 16 years in total. I spent almost all my 20s, almost all my 30s incarcerated in New York State. And almost 10 years ago to the day, I was granted parole. And I was eventually released on Earth Day on April 22nd. So it's my 10-year anniversary month, actually this month. 10 years ago, I was terrified about coming home. Of course I wanted to come home. And I was terrified not just because I'd never seen the internet or email or a smartphone. I was terrified because I thought the world would never accept me. So I made a choice that I would be anonymous and that I would hide and that I'd use my network, my relationships to get a job, a good place to live, and live out my days and put the past behind me as best I could. And that's what I did pretty well for the first 9 months I was home. Then my sisters signed me up for a training program in Manhattan. It was a leadership development training, and they thought that it would be great for me, and that I would be great for it, is actually what they said. And the facilitator on the second day of this 3-day training introduces an exercise called the fear exercise. And essentially, the exercise was a discussion, and then people would answer or complete the sentence, I am afraid of. And he says, let me give you a powerful example of fear. He said, we went to a prison in Texas where 8 out of 10 people who were released were going back within 1 year. After 5, 10, 15, 20 years of serving time, they would come right back in. So they asked them, and over again they said, I'm more afraid to be out in society and face the judgment, rejection, discrimination, and even hatred of people than I am to be in prison where everyone is like me and I can live with my guilt and my shame. When I think about that, that was my reality. And he used that example, and then he made a joke. And he said, of course they want to go back to prison. They get 3 meals a day. They live rent-free. They don't have to pay for the gym. And they get sex from time to time. And I heard that as condoning rape in prison. I'm not sure that that's what he meant. But in that moment, I felt I had ex-con written on my forehead, that I had been exposed. I felt unsafe, even threatened in the room. And he calls a break. And I step out into Midtown Manhattan during the break because I decided to leave. I couldn't stay there anymore. And I called my sisters, and I did something called 3-way, which I had never done before. And I'm there crying, apologizing for having pushed me to take this training before I was ready. And in that moment, I said, I've never given up. I survived 16 years in prison. There's no way I'm leaving this training. I'm going back in that room, and I'm going to raise my hand. And if I'm one of the 10 people that he calls on, I'm going to tell the entire room my story. And I went back in, and I was the 10th person selected. There were 5 people on this side on a microphone, another 5 on the other side. People said, I am afraid of my mother, my father, my boss, failure. And I got up to the microphone, and before I had said a word, a woman in the front row started crying. Then a second person. I think they could feel what it took for me to step up on that stage. They could feel the fear that I was holding in as best I could. And I told them my story, why I had gone to prison, and that I realized that day that for 9 months I had put myself back in prison by hiding away from the world, hiding my past, and hoping no one would discover it. And I said, today I realize that I am perfect as I am. Whether you accept me or not, whether you judge me, reject me, discriminate against me, or even hate me, I know that I can do good in the world. And I know that I can make a difference the way I did while I was incarcerated. Today, I'm the first formerly incarcerated CEO of a nonprofit with a global mission. As others have said, I never imagined that I would be on this stage or that I'd be a CEO. But I believe what my father told me when I reconnected with him during my incarceration. He said, accept full responsibility for what you did. Seek to make amends and say yes as much as you can, and you will find meaning and purpose and be free. That day, I regained my freedom. And I left the job that I was working in and entered the nonprofit world believing that I could be a voice for second chances. And I'm so grateful and honored to be part of this Skoll community that embraces leaders like me with lived experience, believing our voices add value to the cause for justice. Thank you very much.
We have talked several times. I was like, I swear I'm not going to cry when he tells it again. And I did. So there you go. You told me a story when you moved to Boston about settling in. And it stayed with me because there's, and I want you to tell the story, but I guess my question for you, once you tell the story, is how do we start to really embrace this idea of second chances in a more systemic way? And you tell the story, or I can, but that's my question.
Yeah, when I took this job with YouthBuild, I left New York City, and I'd been home at that point 8.5 years, and it never occurred to me that when I applied for an apartment in Boston, that I would have to check a box on an application that indicated that I have a criminal record. And so I was denied an apartment. And our pro bono attorneys at YouthBuild advocated for me and shared the press release, and I had been on TV and in the Boston Globe, and they wouldn't budge. They said, we will not make an exception, although we're not concerned about you. Having a criminal record is a life sentence. And I can't get like that global pass at the airport. I can't adopt children. There's so many things that I can't do. And I know that I have to live with that the rest of my life. But it was such a poignant, powerful experience to be reminded what all the young people of YouthBuild and our family and their families go through every day. And I believe that no one should be defined only by the worst thing that you've ever done, but by who you are today and who you can be the rest of your life.
Thank you. Tell us, Brian Stevenson started us off at the Skoll Reform, and he talked so much about the long tail of incarceration, right? And you've just given us an incredible example. What can people, this is an issue we get a lot of questions about, particularly from folks who aren't from the States, although if you live in the States, you feel the same way. Can you tell us about some things that are underway that are trying to transform the system of incarceration in the States, or maybe some specific ones that you're involved in?
I'm not really encouraged by and hopeful about the transformation of our criminal justice system. I think every advance that we've made has been hit and knocked us a few steps back. I think that's the reality that needs to be said out loud. However, I'm very encouraged by what we're talking about here at Skoll related to proximity, which is ironic for me. Being incarcerated, you didn't want to be proximate to anyone. And I'm still very afraid of crowds. It was the most dangerous time when you were walking in a corridor in a crowded space when you were incarcerated. And I still have that anxiety, so it's really hard for me to even be standing here and being part of the forum. And when I think about the millions, and Brian Stevenson said it, who are not just in prison, but under supervision, who live with this fear constantly. And even Jess said this as well in her remarks. A world where we're not afraid of people's judgment and rejection, and the courage that it takes for me and others to share our stories, knowing that someone will likely not accept me. And needing to tell that story over and over again is important, because I believe it frees people and creates a space for people to let go of the past. And I think I'll continue to do that as best I can, and I hope others will, and perhaps that will change the world.
Thank you. Thank you.